Hi, in this class we're going to look at using variables in PHP and using string variables in particular. So we need to do a lot of string manipulation in PHP, and it has a lot of different built-in functions for doing that. It also has quite a lot of fiddly little detailed behaviors that make it a little bit tricky. The way PHP does strings is a bit unusual. The syntax is a bit strange if you're used to another programming language. So it is a little bit fiddly. So there's a lot of detail in this class, but it is necessary because in PHP we do an awful lot of fiddling around with strings. So we're going to have a look then at variables. We're going to look at string variables in particular in this session. We're also going to look at variable substitution and then the built-in functions in PHP for dealing with strings. And there are a lot of those. So a variable is a named container that stores data. And pretty much any programming language you're going to use is going to use variables. And programs use these to move information around from place to place. So if we wanted to calculate the total cost of something, given that we had the VAT rate and the cost before VAT, we might do something like this with the variables. So we might have a variable called VAT rate, and we would put into that 21. We would have another variable called cost, and we would put into that the cost of the item. In this case it's 280. And then we could have another variable called VAT, and we would put into that cost multiplied by VAT rate divided by 100. And so that would give us the amount of VAT being paid on that item that cost 280. Then we would add the cost of that item and the VAT together and put that into a variable called total cost. So that's kind of the algorithm there for working out the total cost of something. Now, the way that would be expressed then in the particular language that we're using would vary from language to language. But the idea of variables is common to all programming languages really. And a variable is a container that has a name, and we can store information in that container, and we can talk about the contents of that container by referring to the name. So you see there where we had VAT gets cost multiplied by VAT rate divided by 100. We're talking about the contents of those variables. And this is how programs get to do things with information. In PHP then, there are some rules particular to PHP. In PHP, a variable name must start with a $sign. So all of the variables will have a $sign at the start. And then it can be, after that, it can have letters, numbers, or an underscore. However, the first character after the $sign can't be a number. And then, very importantly, in PHP, variable names are case sensitive. So we can have $total, $total underscore value, $total 7, $underscore total, for example. We can have $total all in uppercase. Now, if we have a variable with $total in uppercase and another variable $total in lowercase, those are separate variables. They're not the same thing at all. So those will be treated as two completely separate variables with no connection between them. You can't say something like $7up. So you can't have a variable name that starts with the digit. But you can start with an underscore, as you can see there. So that's fair enough. So those are the rules for the names of variables in PHP. So variables in PHP are loosely typed. So what does that mean? Well, some programming languages are very strict about types. So variables that are first declared as integers, for example, can't hold real numbers. There's no flexibility in terms of chopping and changing or mixing and matching types. PHP is flexible, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Loose typing can lead to confusion and unintended consequences. So where a programming language is flexible about types, the programmer must be very strict with himself or herself, so that there's no confusion about what's going on, or so that you don't do bold things, Sometimes a programming lecturer might end up saying to a student, yes, I know the language lets you do that, but we don't like that, we don't do that, that's bold, which is often an unsatisfactory explanation. But in general, it's a good idea to be strict and to know exactly what type something is going to hold. And if it's meant to be a number, make sure you only put numbers in there. If it's meant to be a string, only put strings in there. Things like that. What we're going to look at now is how we deal with strings in PHP. That's something we'll do a lot of, and so that's why PHP has so many features to do with dealing with strings. Some of its features are a bit quirky, as we'll see. So a variable can hold a number, for example, or a variable can hold a string, for example. Now a string is a sequence of characters. So my name, for example, COLIN, you would store that in a string. Okay. It's best to stick to basic ASCII characters. So if my name was Colin Munoz, for example, the N there over the squiggle over the N in that would maybe cause problems. So some versions of PHP have difficulty with non-standard ASCII characters, so we just need to be a bit careful there. A string is marked with quotes, and those quotes can be double quotes or single quotes. But obviously, if you're marking the beginning of a string with double quotes, then you mark the end of that string with double quotes. You can't mix and match. So here, for example, we have variable customer underscore name equals Dan space Murphy. And spaces count as well. That's something you have to be mindful of. And a space is treated pretty much the same as any other character. So this just D is a character, A is a character, N is a character, space is a character, M is a character, U is a character, and so on. Now in PHP, because we are outputting HTML, we may from time to time need to output HTML that has quotes in it. That's a thing that would happen a lot in HTML. So if you want to output a string that has in it double quotes, well, then you need to wrap that up in single quotes. So if we wanted to have open bracket em close bracket space double quote et tu brute double quote close em, well, then we can really only wrap that up in single quotes in order to put it into the variable. And on the other hand, if we wanted to have a string that had single quotes within the string, then we should mark the beginning and end of that string with double quotes, because otherwise we would run into difficulties. So that's just something to remember. Quotes within quotes is often just a little piece of trivia, how you might need to do that in a particular programming language. But in PHP, you're definitely going to need to do that. So that's something you have to watch. We use the dot operator there to join two strings together. So here we have variable fname gets Dan. So fname now stores Dan. We have variable surname gets Murphy. And then the last line we're saying variable full name gets variable fname dot or plus. We're putting in an empty space there. So quote space quote dot then variable surname. And so those dots there add the three strings together. So the Dan part, space, and Murphy get joined together. So that's string concatenation in PHP. You notice I said gets there rather than equals, although we use the equals sign to assign a value to a variable. It can get a bit confusing if you talk about equals, because when it comes to numbers, you see that A equals B is really a statement that's true or false. What we're saying here is that the variable name fname gets DAN. So it's a good idea to use gets rather than equals, even in your own mind. Now be careful should you ever need to output possessives or contractions in English, because this can wreak havoc, of course, with your beginning and end of your strings. So if you want to say the customer's details are incorrect, that apostrophe there is the same character as the character that marks the beginning of a string. So when PHP sees this, it will think, okay, warning is getting, and here's a string that starts THE space CUSTOMER, and that's the end of the string. Great. So variable warning gets the customer, but what's all this stuff here? This doesn't make sense. And so you'd get an error. So this would wreak havoc. This would kill the program. So that's in a possessive, but also in a contraction, like I can't find the information. Again, that apostrophe there would be taken to mean the end of the string, and that then would cause a problem. Not in its own right, but T finds that information doesn't mean anything, and that would cause a problem and would kill the code, kill the program. So in this scenario, what the programmer should have done is used double quotes here to mark the beginning and end of the string, and then the single quotes and the single quotes there for the apostrophe wouldn't have caused any problem at all. So one way around this problem then is to use an escaping character. And so here this backslash will say to the PHP parser that actually the thing that's coming up next is not in fact the end of the string. It's apostrophe that is inside in the string. So the PHP is going along THE space customer. Oh, okay, something is coming up here, but it's not going to be the end of the string marker. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the simplest way around this problem, of course, is to just use double quotes rather than single quotes. But it is important that we understand how to use the backslash there to escape. So if we do need to put quotes inside quotes then, and we insist on using the double quotes on the outside, which sometimes we will have to do, by the way, we can escape the quotes using the backslash. So here we have variable speaker gets Julius Caesar, and then the PHP is saying echo open bracket strong close bracket double quote et tu brute double quote and then exclaimed, and then Julius Caesar is inserted here in place of the variable speaker. There's a full stop, and then slash strong tag goes in there as well. So the escape sequence there is important in this situation because it allows us to put double quotes inside in the string that is delimited with double quotes. If you are used to programming in other languages, you're probably looking at this here and going, hang on a minute, what's going on there? Why hasn't the string been ended here and then the variable string been appended onto that string and then the remaining part of the string appended on there at the end? Because this looks a bit weird to people coming from other programming languages. And PHP allows you to do this. PHP allows you to put a variable inside in a string like that, and PHP will substitute the value in for you. Okay, so we're going to look at that again in a little while. Okay, so just in case you that was freaking you out, that's what's going on there. But the point of this slide, and the point I'm making here, is that we use the escaping backslash to allow us to put double quotes inside a string that's marked with double quotes. There's a /n escape sequence as well, and that goes on to a new line. Okay, and it's considered good practice to put the /n at the end of a line of HTML so that it will go on to a new line. Now, a very important point is that it doesn't actually affect how the HTML output is displayed in the browser, because a new line will make no difference to the browser. It'll just display the text as it comes along anyway. And putting a new line, putting a carriage return in HTML doesn't actually force the line that's displayed to go on to a new line. So it actually does make a blind bit of difference to the way the HTML is interpreted by the browser. So if you didn't put it in, it wouldn't make any difference really. But it's very useful from the point of view of reading the code that comes out of the PHP, so that we can, if we need to look at the HTML and see if something went wrong or see what the output of the program was, it will make it much easier to read. But it doesn't actually make a difference to the appearance of the page in the browser. Now, so what I want to look at now is variable substitution. So this is the thing I briefly mentioned there a minute ago. And this is, I don't want to say unique to PHP. You may see it other places, but it's certainly an unusual feature. Okay. So PHP substitutes variables that are part of strings in double quotes. Now the string must be in double quotes, not single quotes. This only works in strings with double quotes, which is why we couldn't just put in single quotes here. Because we were displaying this speaker variable within the string, we had to use double quotes here. So then we were forced, if we wanted to use double quotes here, to use the escape sequence. It wouldn't have been okay to just switch to single quotes here and have everything be okay. It wouldn't have worked. So here we have a variable called body temp. Let's say it stores whatever, 35, whatever, there's something in there. We can say echo body temp, and that will display the value. But we can also say echo double quote body temperature is, and then variable body temp Fahrenheit double quote. Okay, and if we have a string in PHP that is marked by double quotes, any variables that appear inside in the string will be substituted for the values in those variables. Now this is unusual. Very few programming languages allow this kind of syntax. So it's an unusual one, but that's something that PHP does. So if we look here at this very simple program, we are in the first line here, just escaping out to PHP and explaining to the server that there's some PHP code coming up. And the next line here, variable temp_c gets 20. So we have a variable called temp_c and we're putting 20 into that variable. Next up we're saying temp_f gets temp_c multiplied by 9 divided by 5 plus 32. That's how you convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And then in the echo statement here, we're saying temp_c, which in this case will be 20, c is variable temp_f, whatever that works out to be, don't make me do it, f. And so you can see there how we can do some maths in PHP also, but here we are substituting two strings. There's two variable substitutions going in on here in this one string. So let's have a look at some more variable substitution to see how that works. So if it's going to work, the string must be in double quotes. So here we have variable voting age gets 18. We're saying echo emphasis excuse me, the legal voting age is variable voting age / emphasis, and this will output in italics the legal voting age is 18. And that works there because we have put the string in double quotes. On the right we have the same string, but this time it's in single quotes. And if you do that with single quotes, basically it doesn't work, and the variable name will just get displayed. The variable substitution won't happen. So variable substitution only happens with double quotes. So whenever PHP encounters a $sign within a text string, that is in double quotes, it attempts to evaluate any characters that follow the $sign as part of the variable name until it comes to a character that can't be part of a variable name, such as a space. So if we were to say variable vegetable gets p, then we could echo, do you have any variable vegetable will be substituted for p soup. And so this will work fine, and it'll say, do you have any pea soup? Okay. So it sees the $sign, says, okay, there's a variable coming here, right? vegetable space. You can't have a space in a variable name, so I guess then the variable is vegetable. So it knows to look then for the variable called vegetable and substitute whatever might be in that for the sequence here. However, if it wasn't a space, what would happen if it was a question mark? So do you have an EP? Not a great sentence, obviously, but, well, pretty much the same thing would happen here. Okay, it sees the $sign, goes vegetable question mark. Oops, question mark can't be part of a variable name. So I guess the variable name we're looking for then is the variable vegetable. But if we said, do you have any vegetables? Question mark, we run into difficulty. We see the $sign, goes vegetable question mark, whoop, question mark, it can't be part of a variable name. So obviously the variable I'm looking for is vegetables. But there is no variable called vegetables. There isn't one. So this will bomb out because there's no vegetable there. There's no vegetables there. So variable substitution does save you a few seconds, I guess, of writing code, and that's why people have it. It's a useful shorthand, but of course you have to use it carefully to make sure things don't go wrong. There is a way around this problem. If we have a scenario like that where we need to put a character that's not a space, when we have to put a character, I guess like a letter or a number after the variable name, we can use these brackets here like this. And so this is called complex string syntax. And what we have here is, it sees the open bracket, we see $VEGETABLE close bracket, and it goes, okay, the variable I'm looking for is called vegetable. Yip-de-doo, vegetable is there. And then we can put the S and the question mark straight after it. So this will say, do you have any peas? Question mark, and that'll work fine. But we need this rather elaborate syntax to make that work. Excuse me. Again, that is not without hazards. The question mark must, the open bracket, the open curly bracket, must come immediately before the dollar sign, or we will have other problems. So that would output the brackets there, which would be a bit weird. So variable substitution is very powerful. It's very convenient because, especially when we are outputting HTML, it allows us to throw in variables very, very quickly there into the HTML code that's going out. And that's wonderful. But you have to be careful that you don't screw it up, because there are some quirks that need to be dealt with. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the built-in string functions that are available to us in PHP. One of the reasons we're spending so much time on manipulating strings in PHP is that programs that are written in PHP tend to do a lot of it. PHP is used for taking stuff out of databases and then ultimately presenting it to the user in the browser. And so sometimes the data comes out of the database in a format that isn't very presentable, and we have to do some string manipulation to tart it up a bit. So there's a whole bunch of these built into PHP that we can use. So we're going to look at each of these now. There's some other ones that I've left out, some fairly obscure ones, but we'll have enough in this lot here. So let's just go through these one by one. So stringl takes a single string parameter and returns the number of characters in the string. So if we put the cask of Amontillado into book title here, we can say echo the book title contains strlen variable book title and then space characters. And so this will output the book title contains 23 characters. So if for some reason we need to know the number of characters in a string, we have strlen here to do that for us. Next up we have strWordCount. So this takes again a single string parameter, and it'll evaluate to the number of words in the string. Now it figures out the number of words by assuming that spaces are separating words from each other. And so here we say echo the book title contains strWordCount variable book title words, and it'll output the book title contains 4 words. Now I mean, there are some scenarios, well no, I suppose it depends how you count them. I'm thinking, are there some scenarios where a word might have a space in the middle, but no, in English, no. Be interested to see how it would deal with apostrophes and things, but I'd say, no, I'd say it's fine, it behaves as we would expect. So I'm only wasting your time there now. Okay. So strtoupper takes a single string parameter, and it returns the same string then, but in uppercase. So here if we say echo strtoupper book title, it'll give us back the exact same text, but each of the characters will be in uppercase. So no prizes then for guessing what str to lower does. It evaluates to the string that's passed into it, but each of the characters in the string will be in lowercase. UC first takes a single string and returns the same string but with the first character in uppercase. So here in book title, in variable book title, it's the cask of Monteado all in lowercase. But when we pass that into UC first, it returns the exact same string, but we have an uppercase T there instead of a lowercase. Now you're thinking, why might you want that? But in a database, for example, some things might be all stored in lowercase. And you might want then to, like a person's name, for example, should be displayed with the first character in uppercase, for example. UC words takes a single string parameter and returns the same string, but with the first character of each word in uppercase. So here in variable book title, it's the cask all in lowercase. When we pass that into UC first and output that, it gives us the same text, but each of the first character of each word is in uppercase. Now, some characters can't be used in HTML documents. Okay, so this is something if you were doing a full module in HTML, we would look at in detail, but we're just going to look at it briefly here. So, as you can imagine, because we use this less than sign here as an open bracket and this greater sign here as a closing bracket for HTML tags, it's not surprising that if you want to use less than in a sentence or in the text, you run into difficulties. So this is the bane of maths lecturers everywhere. So if you want to say 3 plus 2 is less than 3 plus 6, well, you run into difficulty because the browser is going to look at this less than here and think it's the start of a tag, and there isn't actually a 3 tag, so that's going to cause problems, and so, you know, bad stuff happens. So if you want to display a less than symbol in a HTML document, you have to use this special sequence of characters here. This is called a HTML entity. And so there's a bunch of special sequences that are used to code special characters. So ampersand LT semicolon is the HTML entity for less than. And they all have the form ampersand blah de blah de blah semicolon. Of course, if ampersand is the beginning of an entity, then of course you can't just use an ampersand in a sentence either. So if we were to have Messrs cease and desist, we'd have to say ampersand AMP semicolon to code the ampersand. The main place this comes up is for non-English words. So when ASCII was first devised, it was very Anglo-centric, and it only had slots in the character table for English characters. So over time then, French users of computers and Spanish users of computers and Portuguese users of computers extended the ASCII table to accommodate their own languages. But this was done in an ad hoc way that wasn't really standardized or uniform. And you sometimes see the effects of that if you get, say, a text message in French or a text message in Portuguese, depending on where you are and when you receive it and what system you're using. Some of the characters with accents, for example, might be corrupted, might not come out right. So if you are producing HTML in a foreign language that uses accents or cedillas or circumflexes, I think the cedilla is gone in French anyway, but anyway, I digress. You will need to deal with these, okay? Fortunately, PHP has a built-in function that can convert the special characters to the appropriate HTML entities for you. So you don't have to remember them all, or you don't have to look them up, or you don't have to hard code them into your strings. So here, if we want to output the Portuguese word coração, we can echo cora and then stick in there HTML special characters, and we put in the cedilla, I guess, and the I don't know what we'd call this, a squiggle, as an English speaker might call it, and you can put the O then at the end there, okay? And so this then will output coração. So if you know that you are dealing with strings that may have non-English characters in them or accented characters in them, then you may need to use HTML special chars. So that's a way to automate the production of the HTML entities. Now, so trim takes a single string parameter and returns the string with all of the leading spaces and trailing spaces removed. So if you get input from the user, for example, if you ask them for their name or their phone number or something, they might put in spaces before and after. God knows why, but they might do that. So you might use trim then to deal with that, to remove the leading and trailing spaces. So you could see why that would be handy. So here we have a bunch of spaces, the Casca of Montevideo, and we're doing echo book colon. So I designed this just so you could see exactly that the spaces are gone there. Okay, so trim book title, so it's going to be this book title but with the leading and trailing spaces gone, and then an exclamation mark at the end, and you can see that there's no spaces there between the colon and the exclamation mark. So that can be useful. ltrim does much the same, except it removes only the leading spaces. So you can see the leading spaces are gone, but the spaces at the end, the right of the string, are still there. So ltrim would be for left trim, and rtrim would be for right trim. So this will take a single string parameter again, but it'll remove all of the trailing spaces. So you can see the leading spaces are still there, but the trailing spaces are gone. Now each of those functions only takes a single string parameter. The next one is a bit more complicated. This is a substring function. And this is an important one. I think you will use substring a lot. Okay, when you're dealing with strings, substring is very powerful, very useful. It gets a lot of outings. Okay, so substring will take a single string parameter, and then a starting position, and then an optional length, and it'll return a substring of the string. Okay, so here we have in book title the same string again, the Casca of Amontillado. Now, an important point when we're dealing with substring, and with strings in general when we're counting them, is that the first character is always considered character number 0. So it'd be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the fifth character here, for example, is at a lowercase a. So we take that string, so starting at character number 5, I want a string that's 8 characters long. So let's look in detail now at how that gets done. So this is our string, and we're looking for starting at character number 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So starting here, we want a string that's 8 characters long. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't forget the space. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this gives us ask of A. If we leave out the length, then it will just go to the end. So here we can say substring Casca of Amontillado 15, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So starting here, there's no length provided, so it just goes all the way to the end. So NTILLADO. There are a bunch of freaky variations that you can use with substring where you use negative values. And I guess there are some weird scenarios where this may be useful, but I'm not sure it's worth the confusion. So, if a negative number is used for the start position, then it'll count back from the end of the string. So here we're saying we want, starting at -8, a string of length 6. So here we go, -1. Notice it's not -0, but I guess -0 wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8. So starting at -8, we want a string that is 6 characters long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which will give us NTILLA. If we really want to, we can use a negative value for the length. And if we do that, it'll count back from the end of the string and omit the trailing characters. Okay? So what we're saying here is we want a string that starts at position 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it starts here. And we want it to be of length that's 4 characters away from the end of the string. So -1, 2, 3, 4. And so we get ASK, OF space, AM, ONTIL there. So this -4 here means we want to strip off the 4 characters from the end of the string. So you can see how you could do a lot with that there now. And the scenarios when you might want to use that, I mean, you know, your string might come out of the database, you might get all sorts of stuff at the beginning or the end or whatever of strings, and you want to strip out the bits of information that you want and just use those and to extract the bits that you want. Now, another thing we may want to do is we may want to find something inside a string. So strpos, or string position, as I like to call it, this finds the position of a substring inside in a larger string. And it starts looking at the position start, if it's specified. Okay? So here, in this string supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, I want to find the position of the substring cali. So cali starts here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the answer to that. Now, if we put in the start position, then it won't start at 0. It'll start looking for it at position start. So here, I want to find in supercalifragilisticexpialidocious the string ali, and I want to start at position 0. So going along, motoring along, here it is, it starts, and that's at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I put in 10 as the start position. Okay, it'll start looking here. So it'll ignore this one because it's starting here at position 10. And so it motors along here until it finds Ali, and it finds Ali here at position 24. Now, there are some variants of this too. So there's strpos, so string right position, and this will find the last occurrence of the string. Okay, so it'll find the rightmost. So in this case, for example, if this was strpos, it would have found the last one rather than the first one. Whereas by default, it would find the first one. stripos will find the position of the first occurrence of the string, but it's case insensitive. And stripos will find the last occurrence, and again that's case insensitive. So it's very common that we might want to find a word in a larger string, find the position of it, and we don't care about the case. So the default strpos is case sensitive, but we can use the stripos and its variants if we want it to be case insensitive. strreplace allows us to do a find and replace on a string. So the first parameter is the thing we're looking for. The second parameter is a string that we want to replace the occurrences of that with, and then the third parameter is the string on which we're working. So here we have variable title has got Wagamama in it, and we have new title is going to be string replace. So we're going to find every occurrence of ma is going to be replaced with da inside in the string Wagamama. So when we echo that, we see that we get Wagadada. Okay, so every occurrence of ma has been replaced with da. And so there are scenarios when we might want to do that. String compare compares two strings, and it returns 0 if they're identical. So if we do echo string compare hello hello, if they're absolutely 100% identical strings, then it'll come back with 0 as the answer. If they are not identical, then it'll come back with a non-zero value. And to some degree, that value would be some slight indication of how different they are, but really that's not especially useful. Okay. str case compare will compare the two strings and return 0 if they're identical, but it's case insensitive. So that could be useful. So you have a case sensitive version and a case insensitive version. And you either get 0 if they're identical, or if they're a match, so a perfect match, and then you get a non-zero value if they are different. Okay. So you might want to do this, you would use the say for passwords, perhaps. So the person has entered a password, you have a password stored in the system, and you want to compare them. If you don't get 0 as your answer, then they're not identical, and you. Now, similar text is an interesting one. So this will compare two strings and return the number of characters they have in common. So similar text hello hello, if they're identical, will be 5 because they have 5 identical characters in common. If we have similar text with uppercase and lowercase h's, then only 4 of the characters are the same, and so this will come back with a value of 4. Here we have the same thing, but it's case insensitive, and so that can be useful. You could see how if a person was searching in a database for a product, you might find all of the things that are exactly what they're looking for. But you might also decide that, I don't know, if what they've searched for is 10 characters long, you might decide that anything in the database that has 7 characters the same might be a good hit as well, so it doesn't have to be identical. So you could see how that might be useful. Now, so that's string manipulation then in PHP. There's plenty of that there to be messing around with. I've put some of those in examples on the example page, in one of the code there. You can have a look at that. It's a good idea to mess around with those and to play with each one of those functions so that you have an understanding of how they work. It's important to know that they exist so that when you are writing code, if you're struggling for something, you might be able to reach for just the right function that can get you out of a hole, depending on the scenario that you're in. Each of these would be quite useful, and if you put your mind to it, you could imagine scenarios where they would be used. It's certainly the case that you have to do an awful lot of string manipulation in It's certainly the case that you have to do an awful lot of string manipulation in PHP, and so that's why we spent so much time on it. And there's even more that we might come back and do a little bit later. Okay, so I did warn you at the start of the class that a lot of PHP stuff is a little bit fiddly. Some of it's very fiddly. There's a lot of detail in there, so you don't really have to keep it all in your head at once. But it is important to remember when you're putting stuff in quotes, depending on how you do that, different things will happen. Also, the variable substitution is an unusual feature. You don't see that in many other programming languages. So that's something to keep an eye out for if you're used to programming from somewhere else. And but it's necessary. PHP does a lot of string processing, so we need to do all that.